much of my couples work, it's two people who really do love each other, but they just can't get through. We have to be clear. That's still our responsibility, is to clearly communicate what we think and how we feel, but also listening with empathy. Sometimes really good listening is just not taking it personal and understanding that like it's about the expression and not at you. Here's the fun part. Individual therapy, so much of it is about learning to listen to yourself, the language of emotions.
It's always said that the final battle is for the family. And you work with a lot of families, you work with a lot of marriages. Is it just communication, or is there a bigger issue happening with families now?
You're not just here in this role of mom, dad, sibling, but you're also here in that role with everything else you bring to the table, which is your personality, your own upbringing, your own communication styles, right?
Religion and faith shouldn't seep into a professional relationship, right? How do you use your faith to approach your calling, your vocation as a therapist? When we talk about mental health, it's very sensitive. You want to be respectful because everyone deals with their own things in their own way. Same thing when I talk to clients or my students, I'm just like, you have to embrace the entire world picture of mental health. Even if we have our own convictions in life, our faith and family, whatever it is, versus like whatever the world's kind of portraying as like the most meaningful thing in life. So it's almost like you have to not filter, but you have to be very careful how you say certain things, right? So, which is why I think I think there was a couple of conversations we had. It wasn't even a long conversation. It was like, hey, like I heard you work in mental health and I work in mental health. It was almost like, I would imagine that we overlap a lot of what we do in our own vocations, which is why like I really wanted to host you on the podcast. This was like maybe a year or two ago, I feel like.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah. So now that we can finally do it, before anything else, I want to introduce Mrs. Kalila Jimenez. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And like I said earlier, I'm a sucker for mental health as a conversation, just because we've worked in mental health for a long time already, and it's something that we all deal with, right? Like whether it be in our vocation professionally or even with our close circle of friends and family, it's everywhere. It's that cliche. So I would have loved to have you on the podcast back then, but I think the timing is right now. It's funny because like I feel like I'm getting to know you tonight. We've known each other for a long time. Your husband is one of my golf buddies. So if you can go ahead and introduce like your like what you do and your career path.
Sure. So my name is Kalila Jimenez. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. That title comes with a caveat because it sounds very limiting. Marriage and family. It sounds like I work with only couples and only families, which is not accurate. So it's really psychotherapy as a whole, right? I studied and learned the whole DSM. Not that I have it memorized by any means. And so I began working with clients face-to-face as a trainee in 2017, and I've been doing it ever since. I've worked at a few different types of clinics since then. I've worked for a methadone clinic for a year. I've worked with an Asian community mental health service as well, working with survivors of the Khmer Rouge. I've worked in IOP and PHP programs, which stands for intensive outpatient and partial hospitalization. So I describe that it's a step down from inpatient, and it's a step up from like a weekly, once a week outpatient setting. And now I'm only doing telehealth at home through a private practice that I get to work with, and I'm just seeing clients one-on-one these days. Yeah.
So your telehealth is not like, it's not one of those like, what do they call them? Franchise, like, is like BetterHelp or any of those?
No, it's
private practice.
There's an in-person clinic, but I opted to go remote during. Actually, I worked in person all throughout COVID, and so I actually decided to go remote right after. And perhaps that was a decision that came out of burnout and traveling, commuting, not wanting to do that anymore. But it grew on me. I was actually against it at first because I really value the in-person work.
I was going to say, yeah.
But eventually, after having to do a little bit of that hybrid for so long, I started to lean into staying remote for a while.
Yeah, it's hard when we talk about mental health, especially, and you're working with somebody over the phone. I don't know if it translates directly the same way than being in front of the person.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
To an extent, it doesn't. You know, that doesn't mean that remote work doesn't still have a lot of value and potential to help, but you do lose things. I lose the bottom half of their body language. I lose some of the energy in the room, right? There's a different feeling in the room versus, you know, what you think you're emitting through the screen, you know? And so, I mean, I wouldn't do phone calls. They're definitely at least some sort of video conferencing, but it grew on me.
Did you always want to do mental health work, or did you start somewhere else and you just got called to it?
Well, it's funny because when I was really young, I wanted to be Britney Spears at nighttime, and then I thought I wanted to be a teacher in the daytime.
Oh.
And I grew up, I went to UNLV. I was a communications major because I just thought it was vague enough to kind of get me a degree. I didn't know what I was going to do. I minored in marketing and entertainment management. And by the time, you know, I graduated in 2012 and started to pursue a professional life, I still wasn't really sure. And marketing became more and more digital. And I'm really not somebody who thrives on meticulous work. So a lot of the data analytics and the social media and the editing and things like that, it really wasn't a good fit for me. And so I call it my quarter life crisis, where right before my 25th birthday, I kind of was panicking over where I was going to go with my life and career. And it forced me to reflect back on mental health classes that I had walked by. When I was in the communications major at UNLV, we shared a building with social justice, social work, and MFT. And I would walk by those classes and think, those look so fun.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was dead set on not going to grad school. I didn't want to go to do more school than I had to or thought I had to. But then life kind of kicks you around a little bit, and a few years later, you lived a little bit more life. You get a little bit more experience under your belt, and you realize, what am I really willing to do to get to where I want to be? And so at that point in my life, I was willing to go to grad school. And not only that, I did so much better in grad school than I even did in undergrad. And so, you know, I'm very proud to say that, like, I enjoyed my grad program as much as I could, in the fact that, like, I really, like, I got good grades for the first time since, like, elementary school, you know? And so it was really, I think, timing for me as well that got me to where I am now.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you were, like, an instructor for, like, yoga. Yeah, I was going to say, you were like a yoga master.
Yeah.
Or you are a yoga master.
I taught yoga for a couple of years. Yeah, I was doing that until 2016 when I started grad school.
And it's almost like you get introduced to, like, the world of mental health through stuff like that. Right?
Absolutely. And I got to teach, right?
Yeah.
I got that form of teaching that I thought I wanted to do. And I think there's a teaching element to therapy as well. So I think one way or another, I found my way towards what I do better at, which is that in-person stuff.
Yeah. And it's similar story. I just feel like mental health calls you at certain points. Like, I never thought I was going to work in mental health. I never wanted to. Even in nursing school, it was just like, I don't think I could do this, you know, daily especially. And then all of a sudden it just falls on you. It's almost like mental health chose you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not like trying to over romanticize mental health, but the importance of it is in all of our lives, right? So when somebody has the passion, the compassion to work in mental health, it really takes a dedicated, special person to do that. Because we got to be sensitive to where everyone's at. And everybody deals with mental health. There are people that are more in crisis versus people that are more challenged with it. And there's a long spectrum of what interventions you have to do. Yeah. So right now as an LMFT, like, what's your daily job like?
Well, I'm taking it easier on myself these days. So having gone from different types of settings and running groups and, driving into offices and all of that, now it's a little bit more chill day to day. Sometimes with insurance, you don't know who you're going to get when you meet a new client. So like that can give you varying degrees of stress factors or, and limiting stuff. I've had clients who clearly needed a higher level of care, and I had to tell them that telehealth was not for them. But for the most part, it's really settled down. I have been, something I tend to say is that I'm very fortunate that I've had a lot of consistent clients that I've really been able to do some long-term work and get them through a lot of things together, or be with them as they get themselves through a lot of things. And so my day-to-day now is pretty chill. It's one-on-one conversations like this.
Like how many calls do you do in a day?
It depends. I've shortened my caseload a lot this past year, but I used to work up to 7 or 8 clients a day, which is really a lot. I think 6 was already a lot. And so I started to bring it down to like maybe 5 a day, do 2 lunch and then 3. But these days it's quite small because I needed to take care of other areas of life. So, and I can't give the same quality of care to 20, 25 people when I've got other things in life that are making it hard.
Because I don't know unless you work in mental health, I don't think you realize how draining it is to work with somebody and to work through whatever they're dealing with. I joke with my students a lot. I'm like, in the nursing field, it's like 6-to-1 ratio for, nurse to patient. And I always tell them, you got to prepare because 6 different people, 6 different lives you're going to live other than your own when you're on the floor for 12 hours kind of thing. And at the end of the day, you're just drained because people actually, people deal with things differently, but everything pertains to where they're at right now, like their history, their experiences in the past, their family, everything. Like when we get their history on the floor, it's almost like you're living through an entire life, learning and where they're at right now. Where could we go with them? What do they need right now? Dude, I mean, 7 or 8 patients in one day, even just calling. Is it like hour-long calls? Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine that's super draining.
50 minutes, the therapeutic hour.
Yeah.
No, it is. And I mean, my long days like that are well behind me. I learned that pretty quickly. I mean, I was doing a lot, especially during COVID. I was running groups and seeing people. And so, I mean, I think running groups too, like, if I have a big group that I'm running for like 2.5 hours and then I have to see like 3 or 4 people after that, like, I mean, multiply the people in that group. How many sessions is that really in an emotionally taxing sort of way? And then you have these 4 individuals, which almost seems like a little bit lighter in comparison to a group. And so it can be a lot. However, I'm grateful that I don't think that I take it home in the same way that people always ask me that I do. I don't go home and really dwell on what my clients are going through. I am able to go home and be myself again most of the time, which is great. And so I've actually had the opposite challenge this, more recently, where I have a lot going on in my own personal life, which I thought I was really good at, like, keeping it separate. Until I had these really awful, like, intense life things happening that it's like, okay, not only do I need to protect like myself, but I want to protect them from me going through all of this and not being able to be what they need and what they deserve, right? Because we're doing them a disservice if we're taking on more work than we can handle. And that's kind of a really difficult thing about being in this line of work, because then, well, if I'm reducing my caseload, that means I'm also not making money.
That's true.
So if I'm not working because I'm like sad or whatever, like, then what am I going to do? Because then that creates like its own problem, and it's just kind of like this weird like dog chasing its tail. Did you have this mentality like when you first started, or did you have to develop that kind of muscle to let go of certain things and not let it dwell? I thought I was so good at this. I was like, wow, I don't take it home with me.
From the beginning?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. Like, not that I thought I was good at everything about being a therapist. I just thought I was really good at that aspect of like, okay, once we both walk out the door, we're done. And we'll pick it back up where we left off the following week. And I thought I was so good at like, if I was, going through something, or maybe quarreling a little bit with my husband or something like that, I don't bring that into the room. It's like it just shifts. And I think for the most part, I'm still pretty good at that. I was just like,
no, that's good.
Freakishly okay with doing that.
That's a little weird.
But eventually, like the things that finally like wore me down is bigger life stuff, things that like I really couldn't handle, family issues that you have very limited control over, other health and wellness things that you have no control over, right? And so I think different heavier realities that I eventually had to face. I've had something take such a huge toll on me that 7 years later I can't fake it. Right? Yeah. Because before I thought I had problems that I was so good at like shutting it down and like being who my clients needed. And I think what I realize now is my problems then just weren't as heavy as they are. Yeah. And it's just a different ball game. Yeah. And so, yes, I'm saying this thing that sounds so nice, like, oh, I have the awareness to like rein it in so that they don't get the worst of me and da-da-da. But at the same time, I just didn't have it anymore. It was final. I was finally pouring from an empty well, and so I had to pull back. And there's good sessions and bad sessions, right? There's sessions where I log off and I go, wow, like I will be surprised if they come back next week, because I think that was, not what they needed. And then there's days where I have such great sessions that it reminds me that, okay, it's not all gone. Like I still have like the qualities that made me a good therapist still in there somewhere. It's not completely lost. Dang.
Yeah. The thing is, life doesn't stop. And that's why I talk a lot about vocation. And when you choose a vocation like this, it's a form of service to people. You really can't pour from an empty cup. And I was under the impression like, oh yeah, like everything that we teach in mental health, every coping strategy we go over, it's like, oh yeah, I'll be able to handle whatever it is. But at the end of the day, when life really hits you, sometimes you don't have enough to give. Yeah. And you're right. The clients suffer, and that shouldn't happen. And I see it a lot, even right now, like working on the floor, like my perspective in nursing, it's hard because I see people on the floor that have lost that kind of compassion. They call it compassion fatigue. And it's almost like the interactions that they have, some are not so good, not therapeutic at all. And my students see it and I'm like, well, you got to understand that we're human, right? And no matter what, you could think you could power through, but if life is hitting you in the face, sometimes you got to know when to pull back a little bit. Yeah. And because you're not of good service anymore, and that's what's crazy to me is that mental health is literally everywhere, to the point where the people that serve in mental health have to work with our own mental health, right? And then arguably we strengthen ourselves, be emotionally resilient. And then there's loved ones, our close circle of people in our life, and they need you. And I've felt that, where it's like you give your all, like I'm good, but I give my all like at work, and then I get home, I'm with family, and then they're all dealing with something, and it's like I almost felt like one day I don't know if I have anything to give anymore, because like I'm drained. And you have to practice what you preach, I guess. Whatever you teach people, their strategies to gain more life, gain more energy back. It's hard though, because you're in a life of service. Right? They call it vocation for a reason. So as an LMFT, right? Like, do you work with the entire family at some point, or is it mostly that one-on-one?
Sometimes sometimes I've worked with individuals, couples, and families. I enjoy working with couples and families sometimes because it really takes a village, right, to help somebody. And really with couples, the big thing is communication. Like, so much of my couples work, it's two people who really do love each other, but they just can't get through. And so it's really a lot of that communication and learning how to listen. And, you know, like, I don't know who coined the phrase, right? Like listening to understand rather than listening to respond. But it's true, right? Because if we're not really and listening to understand, it's more than just like, okay, I heard you, but it's, well, when I said this, what did you take from that, right? When I said this, what do you think I meant? Or what do you think I was feeling when I said that, right? And really diving deeper into not just words, you know, and I mean, we have to be clear, right? That's still our responsibility, is to clearly communicate what we think and how we feel. But also, I mean, I guess it's also listening with empathy, right? Like, I'm hearing you. You're saying you're upset or frustrated with blah, 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 right? Like, I'm getting the sense that you're really frustrated about blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, so it's not about I'm attacking you or my tone is like to piss you off. It's I'm feeling some type of way as I'm saying this. And sometimes really good listening is just not taking it personal and understanding that, like, it's about the expression and not at you. Like, it being at you. And so listening, and that's the same with the family, right? And then here's the fun part. Individual therapy, so much of it is about learning to listen to yourself, right? Learning to listen to what I like to call, and maybe I didn't invent this, but the language of emotions, right? That's why listening is so important in so many different ways. How do you listen to your emotions? What does that even mean, right? Well, Kalila, what do you mean by language of emotions? Well, you know, think as a nurse, right? Like, how do you know that something is wrong with a patient? There's pain, there's some sort of symptom, right? There's jaundice or whatever, you know, there's different symptoms that tell you this needs attention, that needs attention, right? There's a stomach ache, or they're profusely sweating, or like whatever, right? And it gives you an idea of where to start, right? It tells you, oh, they're sweating, they have a fever, take the blankets off. Or like, you know, like their stomach is hurting, like, does it need to pass something, or does it need to be pumped, or whatever, right? Like, those symptoms give you a clue, basically, into where do I go with this? Emotions are the same way, right? Like, it's really almost the language of, like, the body that doesn't always have to be bad, right? Like, all of our body's sensations aren't all bad, right? Or painful or excruciating. Like, some of them are pleasurable or enjoyable. And emotions are the same way. We have sadness, anger, fear, these things that tell us, like, hey, ding, 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 like, address something. And then we have joy and wonder and these things that tell us, like, oh, we like this, more of this, right? And I like to think of it as the language that kind of binds the body and the soul, right? Like, we were born with emotions. We're designed to have emotions, but we're only really taught to deal with a problem if we're bleeding, right? True, like, oh, put pressure, wash the wound, like, put a band-aid. Like, we know what to do in that sense, but what do we know what to do when we're, like, really, really sad? Right? And that's where the listening comes in, because you have to acknowledge and understand, like, there's that. And then also, well, why am I sad? What do I need when I'm sad? Because guess what you need when you're sad is different from what you need when you're afraid. Right? And so you have to follow the directions, but that comes with that listening and that awareness.
Listening to yourself, listening to your own emotions. And it's ironic how the emotions come up too in a physical sense, even on the floor. Like, you know, people say, I don't know if you could correct me, I don't know, I've heard that a lot of angry emotions come up in, like, gut problems. Yeah, like small things like that.
Yeah,
like, you realize it's showing up somewhere. And then, I mean, it sounds like you have a lot of, like, practical strategies to at least start from while you work through things.
I try to, right? It's hard because You know, I tell clients often, like, I wish I could give you instructions. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do that.
Yeah.
But I can't really tell you, step 1, listen to yourself. They're like, what does that mean? And
True.
I'm like, just, you know, like, where are we at right now? Like, what are you feeling? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, what are you feeling? And they're like confused. And I'm like, okay, that's true. But what else? You know? Yeah. And so it's not easy, and it's not cookie cutter to teach people to be aware and develop that like introspection, like that the ability to reflect.
Yeah, because I feel like that's the issue with mental health, is that it's so hidden that some people don't even realize that it's happening until I'm not saying it's too late, but until it's so bad that you have to acknowledge it. Yeah. So like what I try to understand is like, there's mental health treatment, there's like disorders and crisis, but what's that everyday, mental hygiene, like taking care of it daily, where you maintain good mental health so that when storms do hit, like you have this resilience already, but it's hard to develop that without actually going through something painful, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. And so like when clients are stable, right, and things are not in a state of crisis, and, you know, things are kind of smoothing themselves out, that's when people start to think, oh, maybe I'm done here. Maybe I don't need this. And I'm like, hold up. Yeah. This is actually when we need to strengthen your skills for the next time, like, stuff hits the fan, you know? And so being able to really develop whatever skills work for them, right? Because, we have all sorts of books and all sorts of worksheets and all sorts of different toolbox things that work. But really, it's about finding what works for you, because the tools that work for me, like, you might like some of them and you might be like, oh, yeah, I tried it. It worked out, blah, blah, blah. But then your ultimate like toolbox is going to look different from mine, because we have different needs, right? The way that we respond to sadness and anger and things are a little bit different. And to your point earlier, right, when you are having psychosomatic reactions, right, like your anger and your gut and like your headaches and different things, like that's also when it's too far, right? Because if your body has to start telling you what you refuse to like be aware of when your emotions were trying to tell you, that's when your body's trying to take over and go, okay, emotions, they're not listening. I'm the stomach. I'm going to tell them myself. Yeah. Right?
It's almost like the alarm system. Like, just sound the alarm already, because it's bad. It's so bad.
Yeah.
Jeez. With everything that you teach your clients and stuff, what's the biggest family that you've like worked with?
Like size?
Yeah.
Like a family of maybe like five? Oh, yeah, actually, yeah. Wait, there was like 3. So I've had a full family of 5 before.
So if we have a family of 5, you have to kind of distinguish each individual and then merge them together somehow, right? So, I mean, ages, like it doesn't. You're across the lifespan, right? Yeah.
Dang. And in the setting where, you know, I was doing family work, they didn't come to me and say, we need family therapy, right? There was one person who's the quote unquote identified patient, and they kind of come in with this notion of, we're all here because of this one. Oh, right? Yeah. And then the more you kind of get to know them and unpack some of the layers, and you kind of see things, you go, this is family. Like, this person might be like the catalyst for why we're all here, right? And they have their own individual therapist, so that's between them two. But when you're here with me, this is about all of you, because family therapy, couple therapy, like, I'm not treating one person and you're all here just to like supplement that. You're all here as a unit. So I'm treating the unit.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, so
I would imagine they don't take it that well though. Like some of them.
You know, there's varying degrees of that, right? Okay. And it takes a lot of humility to realize that you are contributing to the dynamic of the family life, right? And maybe the problem, right? Maybe some of the problems. You know, of course, we like to blame, right? And point blame, like, oh, I would be better if mom was like this or if dad was like that. But really, again, it goes back to communication, right? And really being able to understand the hows and the whys of why we're operating this way, right? Because what couples and families don't always realize in the beginning is that you're not just here in this role of like mom, dad, sibling, or what have you. But you're also here in that role with everything else you bring to the table, which is your personality, your own upbringing, your own communication styles, right? Like you're going to get one parent who came from a very warm, loving, communicative family, and then you're going to get another parent from like a ice cold, very, like disciplinarian sort of place. And then, that's going to both individually impact, even if you have talked at length of the kind of parents we want to be and what we're going to do and have everything like laid out. But the reality is the behaviors that end up showing up sometimes are still a reflection of where we come from. And,
True.
And, but that's why, everyone's a work in progress, right?
Yeah.
And everyone in that family is relevant to this dynamic. Even the little one who's like, I don't know why I'm here. They just gave me a coloring book and I'm in the corner minding my own business. But like, but it's a system. You can't take one away and act like they're not part of the overall dynamic, right? Because it's all important to observe and recognize.
Do people assume that you always have the answers for them? I'm not even talking about work. I'm talking like even in your personal life too.
It's funny because when people find out I'm a therapist, they have one of two reactions most of the time. It's they shut up and they leave right away. They get away from me as soon as they can. Or they might throw a question or two my way and, I'll get them started. But then it usually ends with, you're going to have some homework. You have more work to do. I can point you in a little bit of a direction, give you a little bit of grounding stuff to help you. But ultimately, you need therapy. You probably need somebody else to unpack it with fully.
Yeah. I mean, with Kirby especially, like, does he know? I mean, you say you turn off your therapist kind of thing, right? Does he know, like, if you're turning into like a therapist for him?
It's funny you say that. So Kirby and I have been together since way before I even went to grad school. So he saw me as the yoga instructor and other jobs, and then he saw me start grad school and go through it and up to now. And so there were times where I'd say, "What's wrong?" And then he'll say, "Stop therapizing." I'm like, "What? That's not a therapy question. That's just a human question. How, like, are you okay? Like, what's wrong?" Which is really funny, but he's amazing. Over the years, like, as I've learned more and more, and it's not even about I took it home and I used it on him, but it's like, car conversations, like we, commuting, here and there. Some of our best conversations are in the car. And, I can't help but talk about, this is what I learned in class today, or this is, what I obviously can't tell him too much about clients, but, tell him about dynamics and just how things unravel. And he's learned so much. It's amazing. Like, I'll talk to him about different coping things, and just different skills, like not using absolute words, right? So words like always, never, everything, everyone, no one, right?
I had to learn that too.
So now we correct each other. If one of us is like, I always do this, or it's like, no, most of the time I usually do this, because you have to give that acknowledgement too, right? And so he's learned a lot of those skills. What's another one he's learned? He's learned some good ones. And so I'm really, really proud of how we've adopted a lot of the communication skills that I've learned into our own relationship. And Kirby's the type of person who likes to fix things, right? So if there's something wrong and we're arguing about something, he's going to try to solve it. And so learning these communication things, it's become a new way to solve certain issues rather than, you're mad about blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to do the thing to make you stop being mad. It's like, but it's not about the thing,
There's
right?
something underlying.
It's the conversation that we need to have, that understanding of like, do you see me? Like, do you see my needs and my wants and how we can be there for each other? And it works both ways. I mean, I had to learn a lot of things, to better myself and my communication for him as well. But yeah, no, he in the beginning there were moments, right, where it's kind of like whoa, you know, but then eventually like we learned our way.
And at some point it becomes second nature. Like, this is how you just communicate. You know, like I've had people say like, well, you know, is that what you learned from mental health? And I'm like, probably, just based on the reactions I've gotten when I've said something or I've asked a question a certain way. It probably wasn't the best reaction that I got or the best response that I got. And then you kind of fine tune it where you're like, oh, I think this is more acceptable.
Right.
And then you end up having better conversations with people. You don't even have to think about it anymore. It's second nature. This is how you communicate.
Right.
I would hope that a lot of people learn that.
Yeah. No, I'm a really big proponent of practicing what I preach as much as possible.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I'm teaching my clients about absolute words, I'm like, look, I know it's really hard. Like, we've been saying these words are most of our lives. See, instead of our whole lives, it's most of our lives, right? Because whole, absolute word. Most of our lives, we think it's so harmless, like always, never. Like, I'm going to love you always. Like, you know, like, of course, I'm not going to say I'm going to love you most of the time. But, like, there's a way of just not using those words. I've taken it into my daily life. Another one is should, not using the word should as much as possible, because should statements, right, they often bring on guilt and shame and pressure, and it doesn't matter if it's the shoulds to yourself of, I should have been like this, I should have done that, versus like, you should be like this by now, like, why aren't you, you know, we worked on this, you should have
known.
Right. And so it's a lot of that, it's this unnecessary layer of intensity that doesn't help. And so really just eliminating these words, me being able to practice that as much as I can, like, it rubs off on him, right? And hopefully it rubs off on more people, you know, around me, not just my clients, because it's important the way that we talk to each other, because how we talk to each other is usually also a reflection of how we talk to ourselves.
Wow. Yeah. What's your self-talk like?
Depends on the day.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not perfect.
No, yeah.
It can get pretty bad, and I think a lot of us would agree that it gets worse at night. But during the day, because I've adopted a few of these things, like the absolute words and the shoulds, it's gotten better over the years. But you have to catch yourself. That's the big thing, too, is it's not about your self-talk's going to be, you're so nice and you're so amazing and you're so good at it. But really catching yourself when you're really like digging your hole.
And I want to ask that because I don't know if I'm very hard on myself. I'm not the hardest on myself, but I hold myself to a certain standard. So it's almost like if I'm not getting something done, or if I know I'm not performing as well as a husband or a father, like, I hold myself to that standard. So people would say that that's unhealthy, right? But at the end of the day, I feel like that helps me show up and perform. Because I think, I would argue, some people's self-talk are those affirmations like, oh, you're amazing, you're the best at ever. It's like, no, I have this objective view on myself with mental health, especially. I kind of divide myself into, like, I feel this way. It's very subjective of, like, you know, I think I'm a good dad. I think I'm a good husband. But then objectively, like, the reality of it is I might not be aware that, you know, I don't know, my kids grow up and they think I was a deadbeat. I don't know. So I have to separate myself from subjectivity a little bit and be like, no, this is what I do. This is who I am. I got to show up for this. I got to show up for that, no matter how I feel. And people argue that that's unhealthy. Like, and I'm not, like, against, like, therapy, right? But I mean, I work with a lot of therapists and stuff. And my first view of it was like, oh, it's very, like, pandering to your feelings. And I was like, well, I don't know if I'm just different, or I've talked to other people and it's just like, well, that doesn't help everyone, being affirmative and like, like, you know, you are the best worker today and stuff. That helps to an extent. I think what helped me, I think, perform better was to be very objective. It's like, well, I could have done better. And like, that's not up to my standard as a father, as a husband, or whatever. I don't know if it's a masculine thing or whatever, like the solver. Like, I want to be like I want to be a solver of problems and all that stuff. It could be that. But the more harsh self-talk that I feel like benefits, or who it benefits the most, I think are fathers and husbands and men. Do you think it's unhealthy to do that?
I mean, it depends. I don't exactly know what it sounds like in your head. But there needs to be some sort of like balance, right? There needs to be some sort of, like, is the measuring stick that you're holding yourself to appropriate, right? And so and communication, once again, right? Like, ask your wife, ask your kids, right? Like, how, you know, what can daddy do today that will make you feel even more loved? And they might say, what are you talking about? I know you love me, right? Like, you have to open that dialogue to get that feedback from them, right? I don't think it's possible for you, Jordan, that your girls are gonna grow up and think that you're a deadbeat, right? Because there's no way that, like, because obviously you care so much, right?
I do.
But what's going to and you're obviously not like doing any deadbeat stuff like right now, so you know, but ask them, open that line of communication, so that you get that feedback that helps quiet your mind, right? Because I think sometimes you might take it for granted and go, well, of course my wife is going to tell me she loves me and I'm doing a great job, like she's my supporter, like, and then what are you going to do? Does that mean you're going to let it go in one ear and out the other and take it for granted? Like, it has to land, right? And you can't dismiss it. That's the thing. You might sometimes hear that stuff and go, well, of course she's going to say that. I'm going to keep blah, 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 like beating myself up. And it's like, well, what good does that do? Right? Because we don't want the people that we love most to be beating themselves up internally, walking around with all this shame and guilt when we already think the world of them and love them and think they're doing a great job, right? And is there room to improve? Sure, right? But it is a dangerous thing to be so hard on yourself and be stuck in this cycle of I'm not good enough at the expense of, you know, the people who already love you, right? There's nothing wrong with goals and ambition and wanting to provide more and to be, but ultimately, like, you want to be there more, not you want to just provide more, right? And so you're going to be there more when you're mentally and emotionally available for them and not clouded with this, I'm not good enough, good enough, because at the end of the day, you're more than enough.
Man, I'm so blessed because, I mean, it's funny because me working in mental health for this long and then Gracie works in peds, like I like to think we have a good balance of like understanding like where the kids are at and stuff like that. And Mela, she's 4 now, so she's getting to that point where she's very aware of things. And I mean, Gracie would tell me before, like even before we had kids, like, I don't know, I would get quiet or something. And I'm thinking about so many things. Like, I'm thinking about the future. I'm thinking about, like, you know, work. I have to get this done. Whether it's at home, I have to make sure I take care of this. And we're just like watching TV. And I'm like not there, like watching the TV. And Gracie would ask me, like, what's wrong? Are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, why? And she's like, well, because, I don't know, you're just quiet. I'm like, I'm thinking about a lot of stuff. Now, Amela is like, she'll notice, like, if I'm just thinking about too many things or planning or, you know, whatever, she'll stop and be like, Daddy, what's wrong? And I'm like, nothing, babe, I'm fine. And then Gracie's like, no, she sees it too. Like, you get quiet because you get in your head a lot. And I mean, that's the hardest part. It's like, you know, you want to be present, but then you also want to be, you know, preparing for the future, whatever it is. And that's why I say I'm blessed, because me and Gracie have this dynamic where it's very balanced. Like, she checks the boxes that I can't check, and I check these boxes that I don't want her to worry about. And we have that cohesive marriage. And it's just unfortunate when you say communication. I've seen, you know, a lot of marriages not make it simply because of that. Like, they're not aware of their partner's communication style, their love language, whatever it is. And I like to think, like, me and Gracie, we've been together for a long time. So even before nursing school and all that stuff, it was like, we know we've been through like the darkest parts together, and we knew how to swim. So now, what's added the extra element was the kids, you know? So like, to have us be intact now raising the kids, it's almost like, I wish people can understand what I'm saying about having that partner in life, having the best communication. And we're not perfect. I mean, I wish we were, obviously, but there's still times where, like, I'll say something, an absolute or something. Like, what do you mean never? Right? But we're at that point now where, you know, it's bigger than us. Like, we have now this new thing that we're building, and we have to be intact. You know, there's days when you have to work and you might not be good as, you know, with your spouse or something. And it leaks into everything else you do. And like, you're not at peace in the home. And that's where peace should be. That should be your source of peace.
Should.
Wow, hey, good. For the most part.
It's where you want the peace to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like, I know that there's, you know, marriages that don't make it and stuff. And it's, for me, I'm not saying like, oh, like it sucks or whatever. It's more of, I think the small tools that you're outlining right now, like they have such large outcomes. And that's what I wish people saw.
It's a huge ripple effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think the advantage that you and Gracie had with, you know, how long you were together, it's not even the length. I mean, that helps sometimes, but it's the adaptability, right? And I think Kirby and I are blessed with that too, is, you know, him being that fixer. Why I brought that up is like when he wants to solve things, and like the way that he started to quote unquote solve or conflict manage with me, it got better and better because we were both willing to adapt. It was no longer two stubborn people fighting to get their own way. And maybe that's the same or a similar thing with you and Gracie, where, you know, the way that you guys learned to get through those hard times and work together and work through differences is you, over time, your communication adapted. And it started to be more like of a leaning in rather than digging your feet in the ground. And so I'm happy for you guys that you were able to establish a lot of that, you know, leading into kids. I'm sure that's really helpful.
Yeah. Like one of the things you said earlier, like it really spoke to me because we grew up in totally different families. Like our families were friends and our dads were friends and stuff. But the way that you deal with problems was totally different than the way my family dealt with problems, you know, and that conversation is very difficult to have. You know, it's not only a deep conversation, it's dark at some point. It's like, you know, like when, you know, this would happen, that's how like my grandfather was or my dad or whatever. And it was me, I mean, taking up my, you know, taking ownership of who I am, where I come from, her taking ownership of where she came from. And how do we start this new cycle for our family?
Yeah.
Like the best parts of both, what doesn't work, what does. Let's formulate our foundation as a family. And like that was such a big conversation to have. And this is even before we had kids. It's like, hey, when this happens, I would appreciate if you did this. Or sometimes I just need you to listen and not try to solve my problems. Like, you know, and it's healthy in a sense of knowing yourself, knowing where you're coming from. And she's doing the same. And you guys can work together in finding that, crafting that new way that we communicate for our kids, for our family, so that our kids can say, oh, this is how our family solves problems, you know, not make things worse or whatever. Being a family therapist, what do you think the state of the world is, though, with families? Because, I mean, not to get too religious, but, you know, like it's always said that the final battle is for the family. And you work with a lot of families. You work with a lot of marriages. Is it just communication, or is there a bigger issue happening with families now?
What a loaded question.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, obviously there are vices and other things that can exacerbate other problems, right? There's things that can come into a person's life and therefore the whole system, which is whether it's a couple or a family, right? That's going to make things harder than it had to be, right, to communicate. And so, I mean, a lot of the difficult things that are going on that people struggle with, whether it's substances or other types of addiction or, you know, whatever it is, it's almost always used as an escape or some sort of like numbing. And I mean, and so we see a lot of that. But then when you peel back the layers, well, what are we escaping from and what are we numbing from, right? Whether it's I wasn't loved at home, or it's, you know, this other thing was taken from me, or I had an injury and it triggered this other issue. And then, you know, like whatever the case is, there's going to be a root, right, of some kind that needs to be explored. And there's no cookie cutter answers. I can't tell you, oh, the family is falling apart because of this reason, or couples don't make it because of this one reason. And while I I do tend to think that so much of it comes down to a lack of communication, right? But that's a very oversimplified way of like describing the micro issues that kind of are in there, right? Because it's the contempt, right? That the condescending way that we interact with each other. It's the not feeling heard, not feeling seen. It's like, I said earlier, a lot of the couples, they love each other so much, and it's so clear to me that there's so much love, but they just can't get through to each other. And it's sad because they still don't work out sometimes, or they abandon therapy because they do really well in session, for that 50 minutes a week, and then they spend the rest of the week doing all the same things that they do that brought them in. And then they come back the following week and go, it didn't work, it's not working. And I'm like, it's not that it's not working, because every time we get to the end of session, things are a lot better, and you're like, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna be like this now, we're gonna work on it. But then it doesn't sound like you're applying those things outside of here. And so then what does that turn to, right? Because then, infidelity is often a symptom of what? Of loneliness, feeling unwanted, it's a symptom of a much larger problem. And so it's not really fair to just pinpoint this is the one thing, because and I'm also, I might be licensed, but I'm not the end all be all to tell you or to define, this is that and this is this. It's, I can only talk to you about what I've seen. And, I've been in the field for 7 years. I've only been licensed for 4, right? Which is not a long time, but it's also not a short time. I've been sitting down with people for 7 years. So, I can only share what I know. Share what I didn't ask
that question to put all that pressure. Let's solve the world's problems right now.
Yeah.
But with what I've seen, and basically everything you're outlining too, it takes a lot of humility to be a contributing member of the family. What I think I'm seeing a lot of is a lot of selfishness, where if I feel lonely, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to go find someone else. Or if you can't do that for me, then I'm going to look out for myself. It's a lot of self-protection, a lot of defense mechanisms. And when we talk about defense mechanisms, with my students and stuff, I'm just like, the ego needs protection at some point, because some people feel like no one's protecting them. Yeah. So we have to protect ourselves. That's super important, obviously. But when somebody overprotects themselves, it almost comes off on the surface as selfishness. When is it okay to be selfish, and when is it okay to be selfless? That's a serious conversation I've had a lot, and I'm like, it's very hard to find that moment.
A big thing I would say to that is understanding the why, right? What is the fuel behind why you're doing this or behaving this way, right? Because if you're self-soothing and it's some sort of self-preservation defense mechanism kind of kicking in, well, is that going to get you what you want in the long run, or is it only going to serve you for a few moments of pleasure, and then it's going to fade away and you're going to be lonely 5 minutes later, or you're going to be sad, or you're going to be whatever, And so is it something that's understanding why you're doing that thing, and then understanding how does this help your goal, right? Whatever your goal is. If you're stepping out on your spouse, right, is that a temporary fix? I think most of us would say, yeah, that is a temporary fix. It's not going to resolve the issues at home. It's not going to resolve, you feeling lonely or unwanted or whatever it is for you, right? And so, but again, that's also where the reflection needs to be there, right? That awareness of, well, why am I doing this? And is it taking me further away from what I really want or not, right? But a lot of the times people act out because they don't have that awareness, right? And they don't know what it is that they need. They just do whatever's going to help in the short term. And a lot of us do that even in very small ways, right? Whether, you know, it becomes an unhealthy relationship with food or binge watching TV, or like, you know, we might be doing it in some smaller ways that we can kind of slip under the radar, right? Or it's going to be this very obvious way, like, oh, how awful you're cheating on your spouse, or you're, you know, you're using substances and you're doing things, you know, you quit your job again, or whatever it is, right? That might be a more obvious thing to other people. But it's, why are we doing this? Is this helping us get our needs met for real, or not? And then where do we go from there, right? And so, but like, I think to kind of go back to those words of when can we be selfish and when we can be selfless, I mean, those two things don't necessarily need to compete. Right? Because let's say you are, I don't know, shopping at the mall, right? Like, and you and Gracie both want to buy a new shirt that day, right? It's, you know, I don't know, let's see. I'm trying to wing this analogy here. Let's see. You know, like, there's a part of you that's going to say, oh, well, I want to be the selfless, providing, amazing husband. I'm going to make sure she gets the shirt instead of me. Like, just, you know, but then at the same time, it's like, but then what if she's also kind of bummed out because she wanted you to be able to have something too? And then it's like, she got the item she wanted, but she's not feeling great about it. Like, or something like that, right? There's this thing of like,
someone felt neglected or something.
And it's like, well, you know what? Since we're both not going to get or if you want a shirt and I want a shirt, and for whatever reason, we both can't get a shirt today, like, let's just both get socks. And then you both get socks. And then maybe they're matching and you both go home like, okay, this will do. This made us happy today with each other. It's like, it doesn't always have to compete, right? It really depends on that moment, right? There's this thing of like, you know, going to the gym as a parent is a selfless thing because you're giving them that example. You're showing them that like health and wellness is important, and that it's, you know, you got to value our bodies and take care of it and treat it well, right? With exercise and drinking water and so. But then there's that debate sometimes that I see with people of like, oh, but he's like going to an hour at the gym. I feel guilty because I could have gone home and been there sooner and helped with homework, right? But there's that difference between an hour at the gym might be selfless, but maybe 3 hours at the gym and neglecting things at home, maybe that's selfish now, right?
Far.
Where it's like it goes too far. So it's really understanding, again, like, why am I doing this? What is it for?
Purpose,
And what's coming at the expense of that? Because 1 hour at the gym, you know, sure, maybe the other parent has to, you know, hang in there by themselves for 1 more hour, but maybe they get their hour later in the week. I don't know. But like, but then that 3 hours, you know, I've seen this with parents too, like 3 hours. Okay. Now you're just kind of, are you avoiding what's going on here? Right?
Escaping.
Like, why are you not being as present as you could be? And you're justifying it with, oh, but I'm working out, you know? And so there's limits, right? There's a balance that needs to be agreed on. No,
the purpose of it. And I feel like if you know, when I have ambition or have goals in life, I think the biggest thing that me and Gracie got to was my goals become our goals, like our family's goal, right? So if we have that purpose lined up and it's like the foundation of everything we do, she knows if I go down to the garage like to work out, like she knows that it's not just for me, it's for the betterment of all of us. Like, I can't be the best husband and father I can be unless I have those moments for me, right? But then you're right, it gets abused at some point for certain people where they're like, it's almost like they're escaping. You know, like whether it's like golf, like she would ask me like, well, like it's 5 hours at golf. It's like, like, you know, but at the end of the day, it's like, I know, and she knows that I'm not escaping anything, but it's one of those things where like, she knows like I need moments like that. She needs moments of her time in order for us to perform. But I think we needed that solid goal orientation. Like, this is our goal as a family, and in order for us to achieve that goal, what are our individual goals that we need? Like, what do I need? What does she need in order to keep that goal as like the focus? And another hard conversation to have. Sometimes people are just, you know, not wanting to talk about it, but it, you know, maybe even masking it like, no, this is for you guys, but no, like it's for my vanity or something. Like, you're breaking it down to the one thing that I really talk about a lot is communication and how to communicate effectively. And every family is different, right? but it's down to the purpose. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? And it takes that self-reflection. I feel like, I think that's what therapists really do. This is my view. Like, I feel like people think you go to therapy and that like they'll give you the answers. But what you're doing as a therapist, it's almost like helping them find their own answer because they know it.
Yeah.
But you kind of help them get through the bushes and the gunk of, you know, what's deep down inside. You help them reveal their own answer to them. And it's uncomfortable, I'm sure, for some people. But that's what needs to happen to be a well-adjusted person in this world. Like, you know, to be a functioning member of society, which is, you know, it's sad to think that there are people like, and the site that I go to for clinical, it's like long-term. They're all under conservatorship. And, you know, it's at that point where this is the best that they could do. This is baseline. And they're just looking for functioning in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dang, to see outcomes like this, the people I care about in my life especially, I'm like, well, I know the outcomes and what could lead to that based on like, you know, their history, their stories, their life stories. And I'm like, how does someone get to that point? You know, we talk about empathy. And when you dive into someone's life, you know, I'm not saying what they've done or what they do is okay, but it's almost like you can understand how they would get to this point.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is maybe being wronged in life, you know? And if someone was wronged or they lack somewhere because someone took life away from them, of course, the natural human instinct is to like protect what they have. And this is mine. And no one's going to look out for me. So I got to do this. I got to numb this and escape or whatever. The hardest part is seeing the outcomes. And it's like having empathy for people. That's the healthiest thing we could do. It takes a lot of empathy to work in mental health. But now, how do we help the world move forward in our small way, right? And I think everything we've learned, like whether it's in faith, in church, everything starts with the family. And that's why it's super intriguing to me that you work with families. And that's why, like, it's that one question, because I always think, like, if the family is where God is, like the center of your family is God, what's happening in the world now? And that's what scares me. You know, now that I'm building a family, I'm like, man, the world is a scary place. And I think I came across this one page on Instagram, and it was like, you don't know how dangerous the world is until you try to protect your kids from it. And yeah, when I became a dad, I was like, it was almost like my eyes were like opened to this whole thing of, man, well, now the scary part for me is I don't want to overprotect my kids. I want them to experience life, but I want to protect them. Yeah. Right. So like it's a battle for especially like a lot of dads that I come across, parents that I come across. And it just so happens I talk to a lot of dads about protecting, you know. But now like to navigate the world, to teach your kids to navigate the world, it's almost like an unending task of like, am I pushing too hard? Am I protecting too much? I have this constant thought, like the smallest thing could like mess up your kids, you know, like, and I don't want to be over careful, but you also want to like to show like boundaries in the world. Right. I mean, I don't have the answer. I'm just like kind of spitballing about it because like, that's the constant battle now as a parent. And I'm like, especially because I see outcomes. Yeah. And you know, what's hard was that, you know, like I said earlier, I work in mental health. Gracie works in peds, and we see outcomes, and it's very sad. She comes home with a lot of really horrible stories of kids that were, you know, abused, or they call it non-accidental traumas. And I work with people that maybe have been the abuser, or, and it's, when it comes to kids, that's where I'm like, there's a line that someone can cross, and the innocence, the purity of a kid, of a child, it's scary to me how bad the world is, you know, and like, obviously there's so many different opinions about what's happening, if it's true or not, or whatever. But I think as a dad, I'm like, I'd rather believe that it's true. So I'm not oblivious to it if it shows up at our front door, or if it, you know, if someone talks to my daughter a certain way, like, I'm not going to be oblivious to that. Like, I want to be protective. And without being overprotective. It's kind of a hard thing to navigate. But yeah, I just never knew how dangerous the world could be until I started working in mental health. Yeah. And it's very sad.
Yeah. Whether it's like an intense trauma or it's little things. Like one of the things that really stood out to me a lot when I was in school was, you could hear somebody's life story and it could have some seemingly obvious traumas in them. Yeah. And you go, oh, that must have been, you could in your mind think that was the worst part, right? That was the most traumatic thing. But then in reality, the more that you talk to them and the more that you seek out from them, like what is it they want out of therapy or what they want to heal from, it's something else. And you go, wait, what? Like, I thought that was worse than this. And you're telling me this is what's bothering you, right? And so it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that, like, we can't tell people what their traumas are. Like, we know that there are some significant traumas that, like, but sometimes people process them already on their own. And the thing that they're struggling with is this other thing that we might, misjudge as or misinterpret as less of a trauma. And so...
But it was like everything to them. One situation.
That thing, they could go through X, Y, and Z, horrible, horrific things, but it's this other thing that you didn't expect is the thing that like haunts them or like struggle, that they're still working through and they're still trying to heal from. And that may come in the childhood. A lot of things come in early childhood. One of the things that I liked a lot, learning a lot about is attachment theory. How do we form attachments in our early childhood? And it starts in infancy. That's how early. So it blew my mind to think that attachment starts in infancy. That sense of safety, right? That sense of affection that like an infant can get. This infant can't talk, can't do, so then I feel for the babies who are in the NICU and they have to be in the incubator, or for, mothers who have postpartum depression and they're not as bonded to their kid. And that means their kid's not as bonded to them in return because, it's a two-way street. And so that attachment that needs to be formed, it's a little bit more work to get there, right? Because it starts so early. Yeah. And so, and then you're starting to like touch on a couple other things where like, okay, then the kid gets older and then there's awful things in the world where, a lot of sexual traumas happen from people that right? The people that have access to you. It's more likely to be, it's awful to say, but like a relative or somebody rather than a stranger, and those are horrific as well. And that does carry on into life, or it could be getting bullied, right? Like I don't know if you could think of a couple of things that have happened to you in elementary school that you're like, I still remember that, right? Because I was so embarrassed, or I was so, but at the same time, like you can't really protect them from that, because if they're at school and somebody says that one thing that sticks with them forever, like it almost isn't even your job to protect them from that, but more so to teach them the skills to be able to work through it and to process it is the thing, right? There's processed and unprocessed like memories and events in life. And so the idea is that the unprocessed stuff needs to move over into the long-term memory where it's not affecting you the way that it does in like the short term, right? And so helping them to process it, because bad things will happen to them. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, to say. Yep. And then there's also going to be good things that happen to them, and there's also going to be, stuff in between, right? And so as much as we want to protect and be Liam Neeson from Taken, but guess what? He couldn't protect her from getting taken. Even that, right? He had to go help. I'm going to go off top. But you just can't. And the idea that you are pressuring yourself to think that you have to, that's going to keep eating you alive, because it's just not what you're actually meant to do, right? Like parents are here to help teach these kids to thrive. And mind you, I'm saying all this knowing that I'm not a parent, and there's only so much that I can say without like knowing. I don't want any parents listening to be like, well, what do you know? Like, you don't know what it really feels like, and da 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 da.
But you work with marriages and families.
I've worked with plenty of adolescents and some families and couples, and so It's something that you said in another one of these podcasts. But the phrasing that I learned it is different. A doctor doesn't need to break his arm to know how to fix yours, right? I don't need to be a parent to understand these like theories and applications and communication skills, right? And it's the same thing I would even say with couples. Like before I got married, I'm doing couples therapy when I'm not even married. And it's like, well, I don't need to break my arm to know how to fix yours. Like I don't need to be married to teach you communication skills, right? Because guess what? I know how to talk and you know how to talk. Yeah. And so we can work with that, right? And because like I said earlier, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what the dynamic is, whether it's parent-child, like partners, spouses, whatever, or individuals. It's the communication that you have with yourself, with the people around you, and is that working for you, right? Like we touched on it I said the word conflict management a little earlier. Like that's the skill right there. Like the success isn't, we don't fight. Oh, we don't fight anymore. Oh, we get along so well. Our marriage is so successful because we don't ever fight. That's silly, right? Like, a successful marriage includes conflict management, which means when we fight, we know how to handle it. When we fight, we don't think we're going to get abandoned. When we fight, we trust each other to know that we'll work through it maybe later after we've calmed down, right? Like, and then the conflict management of that adaptability of like, now instead of I have to get it my way and I'm not listening to you until you hear me first, like it's putting all that aside and like learning to humble yourself with each other and knowing that like, I'm not the enemy and you're not the enemy. Like it's this thing that we need to talk through to get, and so back to the parenting and protecting your kids, right? It's a lot of that communication of, and that's going to build their self-esteem as well, so that like you can help them process things that happen to them when they're small and they have big feelings and it's a lot for them because hey, the prefrontal cortex, right, it's not finished developing until adulthood, right? So they're going to have big feelings and they're going to need your support to process, what somebody said to them at school that day, hopefully not, but something mean but eventually when they get older, they'll be able to process it. Because, and whether that means still calling you up because why not, or it's talking it out with their friends or whoever else, like they'll be able to work through those issues. Because if it's not like a mean kid at school, then it might be like a frustrating coworker someday, or it's going to be, like the first lovers quarrel, when they start dating. And so.
Oh, I'm not looking forward to that. But, I think what you're saying is perfect. Like, I think what I really want is to be a safe haven for my girls, so that when things do happen, they know that they can always rely on me to be there to help them through it if they need me, right? But that conflict management, like you can't avoid problems, you can't avoid dangers in the world, but it's being resilient. Like that's like the one thing. Like this is my gripe right now with mental health. I feel like, and you might be seeing something different, but I do see that there's this new wave of like, mental health being talked about the last few years. And this is me feeling like this. Like, I feel like there's not a lot of mental health resilience being talked about. And I feel like it's a lot of romanticizing mental health of like, oh, and I see it even in, my students, if they're watching this, it's not you if you're watching this, but people use mental health as an excuse now where it's like, oh, like I have this, so, you need to make exceptions for me. And in our field as nurses, it's going to be stressful. So it might come off very harsh to some people, but I'm like, you have to learn how to process through it and manage it because people depend on you. So we want to talk about mental health and how it's important, it's essential for us, especially like a thriving community. How do we not over romanticize it though? I feel like we're swinging too far. Like we broke the stigma. Now it's turning into like what I would argue is like a dogma, like a way of life. Like this is mental health. I'm mental health, Yeah. So.
No, I hear you. I remember being asked once like, oh, what do you think about yourself as a therapist now that like mental health is viral? And I was like, what?
It's viral.
And I was like, I mean, okay. But you bring up a good point, and it was something that we almost touched on a little earlier, which made me want to say accommodations is not the same thing as accountability, right? There's room for both, right? So if there's a real need, right, that needs accommodations, then yeah, we have to honor that, and we have to, be supportive and try to work with whoever and whatever they've got going on. However, that does not mean that therapy is all like, oh, I'm just going to listen to you and tell you you're right about. I don't sit there and tell them that they're right. I like to think that I hold my clients accountable, right? And so you tell me what your goals are, and then like 3 weeks later, we're talking about, oh, this and this and this, and it's like, okay, well, this is sounding like a repetitive thing. How is any of this helping us get to that goal, right? And I have to, I hold them accountable. And, I've had sessions where I probably wasn't at my best because I had a client tell me, it seems like you're mad at me. Oh. And then I was like, oh no, and I was like, but me, it was because I got fired up on that accountability place where it's like, well, if you told me this, right? I'm going off of what you told me, and da 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 da, and it's, it's usually when I pick up on those things, like I said earlier, we make good progress in session, but then it just like disappears in between, and then we come back and it's like we're starting over, right? And it's this repetitive session almost of like we start in the same place, we work through it, and we make really good progress, but then you or you guys or whoever, y'all aren't practicing it outside. And so then I start to like poke, right? And I start to hold you accountable, and I start to go, okay, hey, right? And or maybe you're not doing your homework if I gave you homework, or maybe but it's one thing if you don't do your homework once, like I'm gonna be like, okay, like it's mental note, right? But then if you keep agreeing to do this homework and it's been like how many sessions later and you're not doing it, like I'm gonna point it out, right? And sometimes I might come off a little harsh, right? Or maybe they perceive it as harsh because, I pointed it out and called them out. Like it's different varying degrees, like there are some clients who love it, right? They want to be held accountable. And then there's others who aren't as comfortable with that. But yeah, so all of that to say, right? Accommodations are appropriate where they're appropriate, right? Of course, there's people who may or may not be abusing that or taking advantage of that, which, I think you're maybe leaning towards a little bit. But I can't judge that, right? Like, it is what it is. Like, I have to work with what I know and who's in front of me, and I will give you whatever accommodations are appropriate based on where we're at and what I know about you. But that doesn't mean you're getting off the easy way, and I'm not going to not call you out, but hold you accountable later when we've agreed on stuff, right? Because sometimes you need that, right? Like a lot of therapy too is accountability, right? And so it can be a lot.
This is what I was hoping for. Like, I mean, a lot of people, they look at, therapy, mental health or whatever, it's like a lot of nurturing, like tender, like cradling. And then, no, like I truly believe that at some point, certain areas of your life, you need some sort of tough love. I know people hate hearing that, but accountability is a good way to put it. Where it's like, yeah, you can accommodate, but hey, if we agree on these things, especially if we're holding to, a student to a standard as nurses, it's like, no, you got to meet the standard though. And, those people that unfortunately don't make it, it's almost like, oh, like, wow, like you didn't even, but it's not about that. It's about the care that we're going to provide people. Like, if people are going to be affected by you and like the character you bring and the work ethic, there has to be some sort of standard and accountability now. And that balance of tender versus tough love. And, I would say that relates to everything, so.
Yeah, if you've worked with me long enough, like you've probably seen a few different like sides of me where it's like, it's always coming from a loving place. But there are days where I'm going to really like, I'm going to poke and you may or may not like it. And also, but I'm not perfect. I'm not infallible. Like there's going to be days where I might have poked too far, right? And it's like, oh, okay. And then, I only did that or attempted that because the other time I poked, it worked. And it got us where we needed to go. And so there's so many like moving parts, right? Where, maybe it would have worked on a different day, but that day was too far. Or I wasn't as, like I said, I'm not perfect. Like maybe I just pushed too far and I didn't notice. But also, therapy is a relationship. You have to tell me, right? So some of the best sessions are sessions where clients tell me, like, you know, I've been with you for a while, you know, we've worked through a lot, but something you said last week really rubbed me the wrong way. And it's like, okay, let's talk about that, right? Because I think, you know, nursing's obviously different, where it's once they're, I mean, I don't know about some of your settings, but some of them, it's like once they're gone, like they're discharged or whatever. But, you know, for me, I have the privilege to work with them a little bit more long term, where we get to model a relationship, and that includes highs and lows and mistakes and forgiveness and acceptance. And, you know, like, I'm not actually mad at them. It's unfortunate that sometimes they might think that if I'm kind of like popping off a little bit, like, hold on, like, what's going on here? But that's really good too, because it's a model that says you can come to me and tell me that I hurt your feelings, or I did something that, like, or I said something in a way that just didn't sit right, and that I can also be held accountable in return, and I can apologize, and I can help explain a little bit of what I really meant to say, and I apologize for choosing the wrong words, and, like, we can work through that. That's a model for these clients taking that into other relationships. Right? Because if you can bring up something uncomfortable and we can work through it and safely, like, mend and repair that, then you can do that with other people. It's not always guaranteed to work out the same way, right? Because you know, I'm also coming from a therapeutic setting, and, like, the person that you tried to work something out with, like, took it the wrong way, but it's still a model. Yeah,
what you're saying right now, it sounds a lot like parenting to me. That's why I'm like, I would say,
I'm not surprised.
Do you feel like that, though? Like, when you're working with clients, almost like a big sister maybe, or mom to some of them?
You know, I've never thought that.
Really?
That's never really crossed my mind.
It sounds exactly like how I would view parenting is like, so
I try to be mindful of the therapeutic role, right? Because there are some, like, you work with them long enough, and, you know, you get along on, like, some other levels. You make enough small talk here and there in between like the meat of the session, that, like, you're like, I would be friends with you if we weren't, like, if
in
this
a professional
wasn't
relationship
in this role. So I think at most I've in my mind thought, like, I'd be friends with this person under different circumstances, but I've never quite seen myself as a sister.
No, you know, what you're saying right now is exactly how I view parenting. It's funny, but do you ever get attached to some of your clients, and you really have to just, you know what, the therapeutic relationship has an end, right?
It does,
and everyone needs to be aware of that. Like, once it ends, like, professionally. So you can't say that you've never had, like, an attachment. Like, you know, I just wish, you know, like, this person, I don't know, they call it countertransference, right? Where it's like, you know, they remind me of, like, my grandma or something. And you just care about them a little bit more. It's not wrong, but it's being aware of it. That's a huge thing in nursing. So, like, that attachment to your clients, like, once you cut ties with them, it's almost like you just wish them the best kind of thing.
Well, I wish all of them the best.
Course.
Even the ones that
of course.
didn't really enjoy, particularly enjoy working with. You know, I wouldn't say that I care more about that person, but more so, like, I look at my schedule and I don't feel as heavy. Sometimes. Like I look at my schedule and I go, oh, I have this person today. Okay, today's going to be okay. And even if they bring heavy stuff to the session, like, it's just because there's just that rapport, I think, that's built already. And like, I mean, I don't want to say, I'm never going to say that there's favorites, but it's different relationships. And so the dynamics are different. And there are some that you might, I'll go as far as say, enjoy working with a little bit more than others. But I'll never say care more than others, course, you know? And so, and because there are some that you might enjoy a little bit more, you might look at your day and go, okay, today's going to be a little bit smoother or a little bit, you know, lighter, or not lighter, but today's going to be okay. Like, oh, it's them? All right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, because you're really crafting a relationship with this person. And the way that you would talk to them, too, it sounds like you're almost filling a gap that they might be missing, or they needed to hear these things that they never heard from their family or whoever they're in the relationship. So, as a therapist, you're filling that gap.
No, you really do, especially as a support system, because some people come to you not really being good at vulnerability. So some people maybe get to that point with you where they can be vulnerable. And, you know, I've come across people where I kind of become their only outlet sometimes.
Yeah, I would imagine.
But guess what? It's also my responsibility to look at the big picture and to know that, like, another main goal of our work is to help you build your support system, because I cannot be the only one, right? I might be the only one right now, and that is what it is right now. But if at the end of our work, it's like me or no one, like, that's not good, right? Like, you have to be building your support system, and I have to also be mindful of that's happening or not happening, right? Yeah. And so again, that's why the therapeutic relationship is a model. If you can get there with me, then you can get there with someone else, right? And it's not about like planning a replacement. It's about teaching them that vulnerability, communication, building like a relationship and a dynamic in your world, in your life outside of the therapy room, that's going to help make your life so much more fulfilling, right? Because I can only be there for you the way a therapist can be there for you. But guess what? Your spouse has the partner to be there for you in so many more ways if you let them, right? Your siblings or your friends. Like, you know, I've had plenty of clients who tell me, and it's not that they owe other people necessarily an explanation, but like they tell me all these things, but then the people that are closest to them know nothing. They know nothing. And it's like, but guess what? Like, your spouse or your best friend or your sister or whoever, they can hug you. Like, I might want to hug you, but they can hug you. They can take you shopping, and you guys go to the mall, and like you let off some steam. Like, you guys can go get massage. You can go do other things together, like that go beyond like the talking and the crying and the opening up and stuff like that. Like, if you could expand your relationship with those people who are already so meaningful to you in these deeper ways, like, you unlock so much potential, right? And then how much more fulfilling is your life going to be when you unlock that with all these other people who, you know, you deserve to have them be there for you, right? And if you love them and trust them and you want a deeper relationship with them, then they also kind of, you know, would benefit a lot from them getting to see these sides of you, right? And so I'm a model. I'm here to represent what you're capable of and what you can recreate in other areas of your life, because there is a shelf life. And, you know, and I can't tell you what it is, right? But yeah, you have to be mindful of the fact of like, okay, is this therapy gone on to where now there's a codependency forming, and we've, you know, we're not really working towards goals and we're just here. But like, I always tell them, I cut people off sometimes because I'm like, look, I could just keep this on and on and on, and you can keep coming every week and I can keep, you know, getting paid every week, but that's not what I'm here for. I'd rather, you know, like, I'm aware enough that I think our time is coming to an end. Like, what do you think? Are we ready for that? And then we work on that. And, you know, I've let go of, or I've wrapped up with a few of my long-term clients this year, and yeah, we both cried. You know, we're both crying because that relationship, I'm still a human, you know, and there's no harm in me crying with them as we're saying goodbye, because you know, like, as much as you're feeling your feelings about our time ending, I'm feeling it in return. Like, we've been through a lot together, you know, and but it's the most appropriate thing to do sometimes.
There's that misconception that you can't be emotional when you're working with people. Like, I would say that that's our greatest strength as humans. Like, this is why I would say a computer won't replace a therapist, because there's nothing like another human across the table from you talking and feeling all the emotions with you. Like, sometimes you don't even have to say the right thing, but this person can feel you before you even say a word. It's almost like, oh, this person's genuine, right? And like, I would say, like, it's a power to have emotion with your client. I'm not saying being emotional is like, some people view it as like, oh, making it about you. I'm not saying like cry and like take over the, you know, the emotion of the table, right? I think that's one of our greatest strengths as humans. And for me, like, we grew up in a community of faith, right? And in the professional side of things, obviously there's a line where religion and faith shouldn't seep into a professional relationship, right? How do you use your faith to approach your calling and your vocation as a therapist?
I think it's at the core of my being, right? And so whether I'm trying to remain as open-minded and, you know, careful with my words and being as loving and accepting as possible. I don't care who you are, what you're calling yourself these days, or where you come from, or who you live with, or like what your background is. I am here to show you acceptance and compassion and understanding. I'm not here to impose my beliefs or anything on you, right? I work with what you give me, right? And so at the end of the day, whether it's a client who asked for a Christian-based therapist or somebody who says, no, I'm atheist, or I'm this, or I'm that, or I'm whatever, I work with whatever I have, and I know that I'm using my faith regardless of if it's obvious or not, simply because I'm practicing compassion, simply because I'm practicing being understanding and accepting, because you know, we're both coming from a Catholic background, and some of my clients know that, and maybe some it just kind of goes unmentioned. But you know, what do we believe about Jesus? You know, like he didn't come here and, you know, like just tell everyone they suck and they're awful and like, you know, all these things. Like he came and he loved on everyone and accepted them. And if that love and acceptance, turned into conversion, I mean, that's what it did, right? Yeah. And again, I'm not working with anyone with any secret goals of converting them, right? But because think about it, how many people did he heal that didn't convert, right? How many people did he touch and did he love on that didn't, you know, ended up, you know, whatever, right? And so for me, it's that's not my secret goal. Sometimes it comes up in sessions more obviously where I've prayed with clients, and then other times I'm just privately praying for them and they don't know that, and that's okay. But I think that that's also part of my spiritual role, which is, you know, I really do believe that the clients that have come my way were sent to me specifically. A lot of them, at least. Maybe, you know, even the ones that maybe I've worked with for like one day, or like a lot of them, I really do believe like we were meant to work together. And sometimes you're a good fit for someone until you're not. And that's okay too, because maybe we were meant to work together until the day that some wires got crossed and then you kind of ghosted me or didn't come back, whatever, right? Like going back to the expiration date, like whether it was to what we would think of as like completing therapy or wrapping it up. I mean, therapy is never really complete. You can always come back, but like to where we wrapped up and we like launched you a little bit and said, okay, you're gone. Or if it was like, you know, we had a few sessions and like I never saw you again, like maybe I'd like to believe that for those few moments or sessions we had, that like I was put into your life for a reason, right? To be there for you, right? It's not, you're not there for me. You're not here to serve any purpose of mine, right? So what is my spiritual reason to be in your life? So I leave it at compassion and understanding, and I don't like,
there's no secret agenda, but like you said, it's in your core. But you're not like wearing it like to hand to people. And that's, I would say, in every form of vocation and purpose in life, just as long as God's in your core, then you're the ultimate model that you would hope people would see. And your actions speak louder. So, you know. Thank you for being on the podcast, Kalila.
Thank you for having me.
I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
I'm so glad.
I could talk mental like for hours. So
we could, we could literally do part 5, 6, 7, 8. Like we could keep going.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. All right. Thank you so much, Kalila.
Thank you.
All right.